And hello again from Fox News in Washington. In the wake of the Newtown school shootings, Washington is getting ready for a battle over how to prevent more acts of mass violence. Joining me now are two people at the center of what is likely to be one of the first big political issues this year. Larry Pratt, Executive Director for Gun Owners of America, and Neena Tanden, President of the Center for American Progress. And welcome to both of you to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Vice President Biden, as we said, is expected to send the president his plan to prevent more massacres on Tuesday. But I want to put up some remarkable numbers that I saw this week. Take a look. The NRA contributed $20 million to federal campaigns last year, $20 million, while gun control groups gave $4,000. And 50% of the members of the new Congress, in fact, more than half, have an A rating from the NRA. Ms. Tanden, given all of that, how do you and other groups that feel as you do hope to take on the gun lobby in practical terms? How do you match their money and their clout on Capitol Hill?
Well, look, the NRA spent a lot of money on the elections last cycle, and they didn't have a lot to show for it, especially if you look at the Senate. So a lot of their candidates lost. They had if we're looking at return on investment, they had a very low return on investment. But of course, the NRA is a very strong lobby. I think the issue here is who's going to represent the voices of the American people in this debate. We're talking about things that seem like common sense to the American people. They understand that we need to protect people's right to own a gun in their own home and protect themselves, but there is something tragically wrong when there's mass slaughter. So we have to solve this problem. And I think
are you going to launch a campaign? I mean, there's talk about raising money, big grassroots effort, organizational.
Absolutely. And I think the issue here really is bringing those voices in. So we need the leadership of the president, and I expect the president to play a strong leadership role. But progressive organizations will be working to work in the states, ensure that we have that voice, and really have the American people and even gun owners who support these proposals, their voices at the table as well.
Mr. Pratt, I think we'd agree, the national wave of horror over the slaughter of those 20 small children in Newtown last month, do you see any sign that Ms. Tanden and her allies can change the national conversation and get members of Congress to pass the first tough gun controls since 1994?
We don't think that there's much likelihood that the Congress is going to move on making gun control laws worse than they are. In fact, already there are a couple of bills that have been put in, one by Representative Steve Stockman outside of Houston, that would remove the gun-free zones that have been so much like a magnet to invite mass murderers into zones where they know nobody else will be able to shoot back. And that, I think, is where the debate is likely to shift. Are we really better off when we say no defense is a good defense?
I want to put up an ad that gun control advocates have started running against new Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota after she said that some of the president's ideas about gun control are extreme. Mr. Pratt, you see that ad there. Will that work? Can Ms. Tanden and her allies, and they have suggested that they can drive a wedge between people like you, between people like the heads of the NRA, and some of their members who may not be as hardline as you guys are on gun controls?
Well, I think the senator from North Dakota is reflecting the views of the people that sent her to Washington. So I don't think there's much room to drive any wedge. I think she's representing them rather faithfully. And I think it's noteworthy that a Democrat who would be under a lot of pressure within their caucus to take a gun control point of view is not having anything of it.
That's not true. Heidi Heitkamp has said now she's heard from people from both sides of this issue, and she's now said that she's open to discussion of these issues. And I think the challenge here for the leaders of the NRA and the leadership of the gun movement, et cetera, is that 74% of NRA members, over 80% of gun owners recognize that we have a challenge in the background check system. They want an inclusive background check system. They want to keep these guns out of the hands of people who are dangerous. This is just common sense to mothers, fathers, parents in the United States. We had a poll out this week that over 75% of parents think we need to take much stronger action to strengthen our gun laws. So I think the issue here is really not, one extreme versus another. It's the broad middle rising up and saying, you know what, we can do something about it. After Newtown, the idea that we do nothing is a tragedy.
Let's look at some of the ideas, and he's pretty open about them, that Vice President Biden is suggesting and probably will offer to the president on Tuesday. New limits on assault weapons, new limits on high-capacity magazines that hold 30 rounds, maybe even 100 rounds, universal background checks, and a crackdown on gun trafficking. Ms. Tanden, which of those that I specifically mentioned do you think would do the most good in terms of solving the problem, and which of those do you think is most likely to get through Congress?
Well, universal background checks is really important. Right now, 40% of guns sold in the United States don't have any check system. That's more than Swiss cheese, full of holes, So we really need to address that challenge. I think that, and those are areas where, again, gun owners support a comprehensive gun check system. So I think that's an area where hopefully there can be some bipartisan support. Some of these issues are going to be tougher. But I think once the president engages in a conversation with the American people, he has shown time and time again that when the American people get engaged, that's how you change Washington.
Well, Mr. Pratt, let's pick up on that. You and the NRA and other gun rights groups say the problem isn't the weapon, it's the person who's firing the weapon. So let's talk about universal background checks, because I was surprised to find out, as Ms. Tanden suggests, that in 40% of the sales, there is no such screen on the person buying the gun. What's wrong with universal background checks?
Well, I think it's a false security to think that somehow we're going to spot problems when there's really no way to spot these problems. Some of the most horrendous of the mass murders that have occurred recently, including the one in Newtown, would not have been stopped by a background check. The gun is stolen. The person has no prior criminal record. And so to assume that this is going to be our firewall against mass murderers.
I don't think anybody's saying it's a firewall, but what's wrong with the idea, if you're going to get a gun, whether you buy it from a registered dealer or whether you buy it in a private sale, that you'd have to go through some background check just in case to find out whether somebody's a felon or whether somebody has a mental health problem.
We're wasting our time going in that direction when we should be talking about doing away with the gun-free zones, which have been so convenient, such a magnet to those who would come and slaughter lots of people, knowing that there's nobody that's going to be legally able to defend themselves in these zones. That's where we're really making our big mistake.
Let me just pick up on that, Ms. Tanden, because even Barbara Boxer, and I say even because she's a very liberal, pro-gun control senator from California, even she's talking about $50 million for federal funding of putting more police, more armed security in schools.
Look, we've had situations where people are armed. We've had situations with Columbine, other places where there are armed guards, and it hasn't protected people.
Yeah,
so here's the issue.
But wait, aren't you doing the same thing that Mr. Pratt did? Wait, but let me just say, Mr. Pratt just said, well, it wouldn't have helped in this case. Maybe it wouldn't have helped in Columbine, but it might help in another case.
You're absolutely right. So I'm willing to consider those options, and I hope that Larry Pratt is willing to consider having the simple thing that police officers want, our law enforcement wants, is a background check system. So I think the challenge with the background check system is it's absolutely wrong that this hasn't mattered, and it wouldn't matter. If we look at the Virginia Tech shooting, that was because we had a faulty background check system that person wasn't caught. He should not have had a gun because he had problems with mental illness, and yet our faulty system allowed that to happen. So, people would be protected today. People would be alive today if we had these kinds of things in place.
Joe Biden has indicated that in addition to this legislative action that he's going to suggest to the president, that the president could also take executive action, but not on the big things, not on things like banning guns or universal background check. What kinds of things do you believe the president can do on an executive action basis, unilateral basis, that could make a difference? Well,
he can just start by ensuring that the federal government, people within the federal government, turn over their records also to the background check system. So, the Defense Department needs to do that. Others need.
So more information sharing.
More information sharing within the government
Mr. Pratt, would you have a problem with that kind of executive action?
Again, I think we're we're just avoiding the reality that we have been moving in the direction that somehow self-defense is not valid, that we can somehow protect ourselves by this background check idea, and in fact, background checks wouldn't have stopped most of the last of these mass murders that have occurred. The gun gets stolen, the person has no background that would have popped up. So we've got to face the reality that we've got to empower average people, including teachers and other people in schools, to be able to defend themselves.
All right. I want to get into one last issue, a bigger issue. Mr. Pratt, you say one of maybe the basic problem here is the President Obama's disdain for the constitutional right to bear arms. And in fact, you have compared him to George III, the British monarch during the American Revolution.
Might he learn from his example?
Yes. But when the Supreme Court ruled on the Second Amendment in the 2008 case, the Heller case here in D.C., I want to put up what Justice Scalia said. Let's put it up on the screen. There seems to us no doubt on the basis of text and history that the Second Amendment conferred an individual right to bear arms. Of course, the right was not unlimited. In fact, in his decision, Scalia talked about restrictions on what kinds of guns can be sold, who can buy them, and where they can be carried. So, yes, he said there's a Second Amendment individual right, but he didn't say it's without limits.
Well, that was unfortunate because the amendment does provide its own degree of scrutiny. It says, shall not be infringed. And we know that at least one justice, Mr. Thomas, takes that point of view. This is not something where the government is supposed to be free to tell we the people, the government's boss, how far we can go with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is there to constrain the government.
So you think that Scalia was wrong when he said that that right is not unlimited?
He was not speaking from a constitutional perspective.
And finally, Ms. Tanden,
Supreme Court Justice.
Pardon?
Though he's a Supreme Court Justice.
Well, you disagree with Supreme Court justices all the time.
I do, but I'm surprised that he's disagreeing with Justice Scalia on this issue.
Let me ask you, though, you talked at the very beginning about presidential leadership, and you worked in the Obama White House for a year or so. This president has to deal with a debt ceiling. He wants to pass major immigration reform.
Absolutely.
He wants to do something about climate change. Have they told you, has he told you how much political capital he is willing to spend on what's going to be a very tough fight?
You know, I think that the president has demonstrated tremendous leadership on this issue. I think the country rallied around him and his leadership after Newtown because he really was a voice for those parents who lost a child.
But has he told you how much?
And I see from his actions, and we hear from the White House, and we hear from the vice president that they're going to lay down political capital on this issue. And I think the one thing I would say to those people like Larry and others who say we can't do anything about these issues is that whether it comes from background checks or dealing with high-capacity magazines, which was the issue in Newtown, we can take action, and to say that we should do nothing really doesn't respond to those parents in Newtown who lost children in this horrible tragedy.
Ms. Tanden, Mr. Pratt, we want to thank you both so much for coming in today, and we will stay on top of what is likely to be one of the first tough, contentious issues in this new Congress. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Chris.